Okay, so back to our time card. Now let's talk about the other rows we didn't talk about. This row, ag activity. And when I click in there, you'll see mode activity tracking. And even though I can double click in here like I'm going to enter time, the screen doesn't let me enter time here. I can't enter ag activities. And ag activity is, say, nursery inspections or pest exclusion, quarantine inspections, that type of thing. And I can't enter it here, even though it's a form I need to fill out. It's too detailed of a form to try and pop it up in a little dialog box like this on top of the time card. As you can imagine, this form for ag training has 5 different fields that I collect, plus remarks. But pest exclusion has like 43. So there's no way I can fit all of that into a little pop-up form on top of the time card. So instead of entering ag activities or weights and measures activities here, we're going to go to a more customized ag activity entry or weights and measures activity entry screen for those. And the first one I want to jump into is agriculture, which will include both your CDFA ag activities and your PUE activities. And then we'll switch over and cover the weights and measures entry. So for ag activity, there's a few different ways I can enter ag activities. There is a new activity button here, which I can click on. And that will give me a list of all the activities that I have access to in my county, as well as weights and measures inspections. But instead of going, this is like a shortcut to get there. I'm going to go directly into the agriculture menu. I'm going to start with the top command, which is the ag activities dashboard. So this is a subset of the main dashboard that just focuses on the ag activities that I performed this payroll period. And right now it's telling me in this 2-week period, I've done PUE activities on the 21st and the 20th for this total number of hours. And in order to add some additional ag activities, I can use my new activity button. And let's start with a simple one, right? Pest detection. So if I'm doing trapping work, and I've done trapping work this payroll period, this is the trapping form. Okay, so this is one of the less detailed forms in all of the ag forms. A lot of them are much longer than this, but you can already tell that there's a lot more functionality on here than I could fit in a little pop-up window on top of the time card. Then that's why to enter these kinds of activities, you come over to this separate area where we've got more screen real estate to handle the complexities. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this date, and I'll explain why in just a second, but I'm going to kick this out to July. So the very first thing you specify on your daily activity entry forms is the date you're entering activity for. Most counties have some type of daily system for their ag tracking, whether it was paper forms or an access database. So hopefully the term, daily activity summaries isn't unusual to you. These forms have been directly designed from the CDFA County Monthly Report forms. And we are constrained by those forms. Even though we know those forms are out of date, our commitment to CDFA was to stick with those forms until such time as they're ready to modify them. So all of the caveats and all of the workarounds and whatnot that you've been using for the CMR portal are still in place with CalCATS. We don't have any magic solution to that. So things like, whether or not you track committed hours, that's going to stay the same as it's been for the last few years. Not sure when CDFA will have the time and the budget to work on their CMR reports, but when they do, we'll be standing by ready to update our forms to match whatever it is that they change. Now, before we get into actually entering the time, we have some additional classifications here, some additional data collection. The first one we see is contracts. I don't have any contracts entered in this test system yet, but the first expansion of CalCATS that we did was recognizing that bigger counties may have multiple CDFA contracts to track. And trapping has become one of the most common ones. where CDFA actually issues you different contracts for your CalTrap traps or your core traps versus your additional traps. And then you may have additional county traps that you run that, are not part of either of those contracts. So how do we track that information? Any program, like take, for example, pest management, or pest eradication, you may have a noxious weed program with CDFA, but you may also have a local weed control district that contracts you to do weed control work and to spray herbicides on weeds. So in order to separate that time out, even though from a CMR reporting, if you spend 8 hours doing weed eradication, it's 8 hours of weed eradication. In order to assign that to the correct contract, we have this contracts drop down. So as time goes by, if you set up your individual contracts to track, then your staff, whoever is doing this work, will need to pick the right contract to make sure the time gets allocated to the right contract. The benefit of doing that is when it comes time to invoice those contracts, you can run reports by contract, which then gives you all the data you need for the invoice for that contract directly out of CalCATS in a nice Excel format that you can, then work into your invoicing process. So I'll jump back around to looking at the contract management screen in a bit, but just be aware that, on any given day, if you do trapping work, you may need to fill out 2 of these daily activity forms for 2 different contracts, core and additional. There are additional levels of breakdown, which I won't cover here, but just be aware that in some counties, even though they may have a single contract, that contract may require, for billing purposes, that they break out time using other classifications, districts or zones or, whatever. So we have a very flexible mechanism under a contract to create what we call classifications. That's a second level of differentiation for these daily entry forms. And then a third is location. So some counties actually track individual activities at a specific grower facility or packing house or whatever it is that they're working at. And you can use all 3 of these to create a unique daily entry form. So skipping over a lot of that complexity, which we can come back to if there are questions. Once I've picked the right date, I'll go down and I'll fill in my hours. So visual inspections, I did 2 hours of visual inspections. I did 5 net acres on a 7.5 acre field, and it was 1 property. Then I'll click save. Anytime there's a save button, make sure you click save before you leave the screen, right? I mentioned that on the time card. The time card doesn't have a save button. This screen does. If I change some data and I try and leave without clicking save, so I try and go back to the timesheet here, I will get a warning. So we do our best to try and protect you from accidentally not saving. Then I can click cancel and I can click save. So in its simplest form, that's all I do. I just fill out the form like I would fill out, for the county monthly reporting portal. And then I go back to my timesheet and I will see that on July 1st, which is next payroll period, I have that 2 hours has automatically been transferred to my time card for me. Okay, so activity entry is very much like any other timesheet category, except you go to a different screen to fill out the form because it's very detailed. The time you enter, though, is automatically entered on your time card for you. And if I double click on that, I'll see that it was for some pest detection work on that day. And I do have a pencil icon here to quickly get me back to that pest detection daily form in case I need to make any edits. Okay, more information on this form. Special survey. These trap types, GVM, CAPRA, and LBAM, these are customizable. So in your administrative configuration, you can modify this list. Once data has been entered for a trap type, you won't be able to delete it, but you can deactivate it. So if you don't track EGVM anymore, you can just deactivate it and it will disappear off of these forms starting on the deactivation date. So if I deactivate it today, a form I entered yesterday would still show it. Then we get to the interesting part, which is your trapping tracking. And the reason I jumped forward to July 1st is this is an updated version of the form that lets you track trapping routes, and that's actually being released in production July 1st. So from day one, you'll see this version of the form that has the trapping route selector. So what is a trapping route? Before I actually enter any trap servicings or traps added and removed, I have to pick a trapping route. And the reason for that is we wanted to make the system automatically calculate total in operation. And to do that, we need to track which trapping route you're working on. So quick aside here, where do these trapping routes come from? Under the agriculture menu, there are several other things here, but the first one we'll see is trapping routes, which I'm going to open in a new tab here. Just for those of you that don't use web browsers a whole ton, if I want to keep my place on this form and open this trapping routes in a separate tab, I can just hold down the control button and click trapping routes, and it'll pop it open in a new tab for me. So whoever is running your trapping program will need to set up your trapping routes. And each trapping route consists of, basically if I add a new route here, consists of a checkbox for which trap types are on that route. So if I added a new route 3, I would say, okay, this is just EGVM and LBAM traps. In addition, in order to be able to calculate the total in operation, I need a starting point. Right, so I need to know on July 1, 2024, there were 75 traps in operation. Okay, because what the system is going to do is every day that trappers enter trapping summaries, they're going to add and subtract from this number every day from 7/1 to whatever, if they're entering data for September or December, it's going to count forward to the total number in operation for that day. In addition, if I want to, I can specify a target count. So if we're supposed to have 95 traps on this route, I can say that's our target. And that is displayed on the, on the trapping entry form and also on the trapping report, just so you can keep track of, how many short or how many over you are on your trap counts. And then similarly, I'll have to put in a start date for LBAM. And in that case, we have 0. So it's just going to be adding and removing from 0. And our target is 25. Okay. Optionally, I can provide a longer description. I don't need to. Save, and now I have 3 trapping routes available. So there's a little bit of setup that happens to get the trapping routes defined. And then when your trappers are entering their trapping forms, and I'm going to refresh this screen to pick up that 3rd trapping route I just entered. First thing they'll do is they'll pick which trapping route they're working on, and then that will populate the appropriate trap types, and they can enter their trapping summary. So I did 12, none relocated. I added 4, none removed, and that was 2.5 hours and 25 miles. And then LBAM, I did 2, relocated 1, added 4, didn't remove any, and that was 1.5 hours and 13 miles. Okay, and I can save that. So that's pretty much the anatomy of a ag data entry form. Now, to illustrate this whole contracts thing, I'm going to jump over to a different county here. I don't have any contracts set up in this test county, but I do want you to see how you would go about entering 2 pest detection daily summaries for the same day for different contracts. So same system, different county, slightly different configuration. If I go into my pest detection form, I will see here some various contracts that have been entered. You can ignore the names, it doesn't really matter what they are. But let's say I enter my trapping data for, and I'm just going to enter this as visual inspections because it's simple. So I've now entered for 6/24 on the EGVM contract, I've entered a report 1 pest detection daily summary. Now I need to add one for this other contract. Well, I can't change the contract here because that would actually be changing these 2 hours. So instead, you'll see there's a button here that's called Add New Report. When I click Add New Report, then at the top right, you'll see a little summary appears of all the different daily activity forms I've entered for this date on Report 1. And now I can pick the other contract and put in another 4 hours. So you'll see I have a total of 6 hours for the day. 2 hours are going to be billed to this contract, 4 hours are going to be billed to this other contract. And this little summary screen up here lets me switch which form I'm looking at. And it also lets me delete one of the forms if I need to. I can click the red X and that will delete that report. Same thing as this delete this report button does. Okay, so in cases where you have multiple potential contracts, that's just something you'll need to communicate with your staff is which contract should time be billed to. And then that becomes part of reviewing the time entry at the end of every period to make sure people have put their hours on the correct contracts. Again, it is some effort, but if the effort becomes worth it when it's time to generate the invoices, and you find you can just spit some reports out of CalCATS and your invoices are done. Okay, back to our main test county now. So back on our timesheet, all those different ag activities are accessible through this list. There are some that are not on this list, and again, that's just the configuration. Your county may, this county doesn't do sudden oak death or dog team or any of those other pest management sub-programs. They don't have Pierce's disease. It's not a GWIS county, et cetera. So your list here may vary. The concept is the same for no matter what ag activity you're working on. In order to enter your summary time, you'll select the report, you'll make sure it's set to the right date, and then you'll fill in the form appropriately. Okay, there are a couple of possible exceptions to that standard approach. And what we're doing here is, CalCATS was initially designed just to do these summary level daily activity forms. But some of the counties we've worked with have really, really big programs in certain areas, and they wanted more detail for tracking purposes. So for nursery inspections and quarantine inspections, you do have the option of not filling out this daily summary, but instead filling out individual inspections. I doubt that Humboldt County will do that for either of those two programs. But I just want you to be aware of, the various options that there are in the system so that as time goes by and your focus, intensifies in certain areas, you can request that we provide more detail behind these daily summary forms. So as an example, for nursery inspections, instead of entering the summary of nursery inspections in this box, I can opt to have a nursery inspections form where I can enter every nursery inspection, very much like I would add a PUE inspection or a weights and measures inspection. And then as I fill out these individual nursery inspections and save them, the system will automatically compile those on my report my report 7 for me. Okay, so enough said about that. Let's hop back to the timesheet here. So how can I make it easier? It's only 2 clicks. If I click on new activity, I can get a list of all the activities. But there are some useful little things in CalCATS. You may have 2 or 3 of these that you do primarily in your job function, right? So maybe you work on pest detection and pest exclusion 90% of your time. If you look up in the top right here where it says my username, there's a little down arrow, meaning there's a menu here, and there is a My Profile screen. So let's have a look at the My Profile screen. There's lots of useful things here. The first is that's where you go to change your password. So if you decide you want to change your password to something new, click on there and you'll get a little change password form that lets you change password. Next to it is this manage quick actions. So if I click on that and I say, I want shortcuts to pest detection and pest exclusion. Now, if I go back to my timesheet, you'll see that that new activity button now has a little menu drop down. And I can very quickly get access to my pest detection and pest exclusion forms directly from there. In addition, the agriculture menu itself has my favorite actions down at the bottom here. So I can jump directly to a new form right off of the agriculture menu. Okay, so that's one of the neat features of the profile screen. There is a communication options. Right now, we don't send any automated communications out of CalCATS, but I'm sure in the future we will. And by default, we're going to send it to the email that you logged in with. So if for some reason the email you logged in with is no longer your official county email, or you decide you want SMS messages instead, you can use this communication options section to register an alternate communications method and then just set that as your favorite.